everyone, and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of Holt Construction, welcome to our series, Get to Work on Terminal 8, the strategic programming we have created in partnership with American Airlines to engage, inform, and hire certified MWBEs, LBEs, and members of Queens community interested in working on the JFK Terminal 8 expansion. My name is Chris Asara, and I serve as president of Holt Construction, a family-owned and operated full-service construction management and general contracting firm. If you have never worked with Holt before, you should know that when it comes to diversity and inclusion, our commitment is built from the top down and from the inside out. We have taken on the JFK Terminal 8 expansion like all of our other projects, and that includes creating a tailored, unique, and comprehensive diversity. I'm excited to kick off today's session, and I hope you find the information engaging and informative. On behalf of Holt, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us, and I look forward to connecting and working with you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. With the rising cost of insurance and different types of policies available, how do you know which plan is best for you and your company? Some providers are offering insurance that may not include coverages that you really need. It is important for us during this session to provide information on what types of insurance you will need to work on the JFK Terminal 8 expansion project. Insurance experts will also review which policies to avoid and how to make the choice that will keep you covered and protected. And now I'd like to introduce you to Robert DiBiase, Executive Vice President at Alliance Insurance Services. Good afternoon, Robert, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Alexandria. Thank you for having me. I look forward to this great discussion.
Great. How important is insurance for your business?
Well, I would say that for every contractor that's listening, insurance is probably one of the most important things that you can do when you're starting a business. When you look at insurance as a whole, this is really something there to give you the peace of mind to run your business. In addition, it's something that most of the people that you're going to be hired to work for are going to require you to procure and have those coverages necessary to protect them and you as a business owner.
That's great. How important is insurance coverages for MWBEs as part of the pre-qualification process? Why, when contractors come to pre-qualify with us, why do you look at their insurance? Why is it so important to look at what coverages they have?
That's actually a great question. I've been doing that for Holt here for this project for a number of months now. And the reason we do it, and I've had this discussion with a number of contractors looking to pre-qual, the most important thing in New York right now is what we call the labor law, Scaffold Law 240, 241. It's a law written into the books here in New York that really affects contractors and affects your bottom line more than anything else out there. And because of the fact that we're in a pretty big project here with the American Airlines and the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, these coverages that are required need to make sure that this exclusion is not on your policies. Therefore, we've got to really look at the policies and really, we read the policies, we understand what's going on with the language in the policies much better than a contractor. You folks on this, are hired to build the building, not worry about the insurances. So us as the professional, read the policies, understand it, and really give the folks at Holt and the folks at American Airlines the information necessary to protect them and to protect you.
That's great. As a construction company, what types of insurance should you have? I think that's the biggest question that I get from a lot of smaller contractors. What kinds of insurance should they have as a matter of normal business?
So at the very least, all contractors should really have 4 coverages. General liability coverage, which is really third-party coverage. It protects you for bodily injury and property damage to others. Your commercial automobile, if you have automobile fleets, if you have cars that you're using for business, you need to have a commercial automobile policy to protect the business and protect yourselves. Workers' compensation, so that's to protect your workers and employees while on the job for any accidents that happen or injuries that happen to them. And then last but not least is umbrella or excess liability. That would be the coverage that you would have that sits over all of the three that we just spoke about: the general liability, the commercial auto, and the workers' comp.
Great. Now, I know that insurance policies can be huge, like contracts. So what section should people look at within their policy to make sure that they do have all the coverages that they should have? Are there any certain sections that they should look at? Is there any way you could direct them right to what they should be reading?
Yeah, there are two sections that everyone should be familiar with when you look at policies. Number one is the declarations pages. So the first few pages of the policy tell you the limits, tell you your starting and expiration date, tell you what your policy is based on or rated on. So policies for general liability, as an example, are rated on payroll, they're rated on sales, they're rated on subcontracted costs, they're rated on a number of different things. That information is provided by you, the contractor, to your insurance broker, who then sends it to the insurance company. You want to make sure that that information is accurate for you, number one, when you buy the coverage, but also when you have a claim. If you, for example, were to say you're a concrete contractor and the application or the declaration page says you're a roofing contractor, there could be some questionability as far as coverage is concerned. So that's the most important thing when you're looking at the declaration page, is to make sure the company and the type of business that you're in is actually highlighted on that page. The second thing I would really look at from my perspective and from most insurance perspectives is the declarations, the terms and conditions page. And what I mean by that is there's going to be a page that lists every single document included in your policy. So it'll give you a form number, it'll give you a brief explanation. So for a commercial general liability policy, it would say the CG0001, and then it would say commercial liability policy, and so on and so forth. In that form schedule are exclusions. Those are where I really want to focus. What is not covered by the insurance policy? What do you have to worry about as a business owner that could potentially be a risk that you may not have insurance for? And this is really the most important thing when you look at the policy, is what's not covered. We know what's covered. If someone gets hurt on the job, if someone trips on the job, if there's an accident where there's property damage or there's an injury to a person, we understand, and it's our fault, we understand it's covered. But what's not covered? What are those hidden items that might not be covered that you have a business risk for? That's the real meat and potatoes of the policy from my perspective. What is not covered? Because we know what's typically covered. We really need to focus on what isn't covered and how we as business owners understand if we can buy coverage for it, or if it's something that doesn't apply to our business, so it's not something we would need to worry about.
Great. Now, I know that a lot of companies, they'll ask when we find that their insurance is not adequate, they'll ask, why is it not adequate? Why do we care? Could you explain what happens to Holt or American or whatever contract they're working on? What happens if a subcontractor is working on that project and they don't have enough insurance coverage? What happens if there's a loss?
Well, great question, Alexandria. The whole thing from my perspective is a claim, and I kind of use a simple term when I look at it, as a hot potato. We've got a hot potato, an accident happened. Where does that claim belong? What policy does it belong on? Who's responsible for it? Where does that hot potato fall? Whose hand does it really fall in? The key to a project like this is the owner, American Airlines, has requirements in their contract that are passed down to Holt, and Holt subsequently passes those responsibilities to the subcontractors performing the work. So ultimately, the loss is going to come in. American Airlines may get sued, and they contractually will pass that hot potato down to Holt, down to the responsible party. We want to make sure that the general liability policy, or whatever policy it is, where that loss arises or is responsible, is going to provide the coverage. If it doesn't provide the coverage, then American Airlines and Holt would subsequently be on the hook to potentially pay claims that they're not responsible for. So in our due diligence, we really look at those parts of the policy that are specific to each individual subcontractor's business, and to make sure that those pieces of their business are covered by the insurance policies that they've bought.
Great. Now, of late, we've heard and seen a lot of subcontractors come over to us with something that's called artisan insurance. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, artisan insurance is really a term. So if you think about contractors in construction, there are general contractors like Holt, there are specialty contractors, and then there's artisan contractors. And artisan, they in for lack of a better word, is smaller type contractors, painters, flooring contractors, folks that are doing the less stressful pieces of a construction project. So those are the more minor pieces to a construction project. I understand that everybody's business is important, but when you look at the risks associated with construction, the steel contractor, as an example, has much bigger exposure than a person, painting the walls or laying the rug or doing the finished carpentry work. So because of that, some of these contractors fit into these smaller type policies that they call artisan policies. The limitation to those policies are really the type of work and the size of the contractor. So if you're a contractor that does under $1 million per year in sales, or under 200,000 or 300,000 per year in payroll, you could qualify as an artisan contractor and be able to buy these policies. These policies are different than what we spoke earlier about, for the number one reason is they are kind of, we call them in our business a BOP policy, BOP, business owners policy. They provide more than one line of coverage. So they may provide the general liability part of the policy. They may provide the umbrella part of the policy. They may provide the property part of the policy. Those three pieces would make up the BOP policy and provide that coverage on a less expensive basis than if you were to buy them separately. The biggest hurdle we have with them is there are severe limitations to what they will provide coverage for, especially in the state of New York. So we have to really go through them and make sure, although you may qualify for an artisan policy because of the size of business you are, you may not be able to use that type of policy on a project like American Airlines because it doesn't provide the right coverages specific to the Port Authority requirements and specific to the American Airlines requirements for this job.
Great. Question. What should someone be looking at when they're signing up for insurance before they sign and finalize everything? Are there certain things that they should be looking for, and asking their agent before they finalize a policy?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, when you get a proposal or a quote from a broker or an agent, there are a couple things that I would suggest looking at. Number one is there should be a written formal proposal prepared for you as the contractor or as the potential client for the broker or agent. What that proposal should have is all the terms and conditions on the policy, your limits of coverage, the exclusions that I spoke about earlier, the pricing, how it's rated. Is it rated on payroll? Is it rated on sales? Is it rated on subcontractors? And what the cost is for you. That's number one. That proposal is ultimate when you look at your pricing. You can't just take someone's word for it. You've got to get something in writing. Number two, they should really be able to give you the terms and conditions, those exclusions. There should be a listing of those exclusions within the proposal. And the ones that I look at, especially for New York contractors, is anything that says New York exclusion, New York related exclusion, workers' compensation exclusion, employee exclusion. These exclusions are specific to the labor law that I spoke about earlier. I don't want to belabor it, but this is something that's very important for all of you on the phone. The labor law in New York is something that typically outside of New York doesn't occur. So for the 50 states of the here in the country, New York is really different than everywhere else. This law was written back in the 1920s, and it really does put contractors in New York at a little bit of a disadvantage when you go out to price your insurance, because this law allows for an injured party, one of your employees, to contractually come back and sue the owner and or the general contractor for coverage under the bodily injury property damage claim under general liability. What happens is it's passed back to you as a subcontractor because of the contract that you're signing with Holt and or American Airlines. They don't want that risk, so they're passing it back to you. So you may not understand the term, but it's called a third party action over. So it's a third party liability claim. It's a bodily injury to one of your employees who would typically only get coverage in every other state for workers' compensation. But in New York, we're a little unique. We allow coverage for those injured parties on the general liability policy via this third party over coverage. By doing that, it opens up a bit of Pandora's box where you've got coverage under workers' comp and you're providing coverage under general liability. This exclusion really hurts each and every one of us if there's an exclusion on the policy. So that's something that we've got to make sure we don't have on the policy. And it would be highlighted via one of those employee exclusions, something like that, that would be on that proposal. If you see something like that, you can always ask the agent or broker for a copy of the specific wording, and you can read it, or you can share that with your attorney, or you can share that with a trusted source, some other contractor maybe, or another broker that you may have a relationship with to speak to, a consultant, to give you guidance on what it means and how it would impact your business. Those are really the two things that I focus on, or I would suggest focusing on for each and every one of you when you're getting a price quote from a broker or an agent.
That's great. Now, I know that Holt and Alliant, we're new companies together, and we selected Alliant because whenever we have a question, you yourself and your team, you answer our questions, you're very responsive whenever we need something. So that's why we selected your company. Is that something that other people should be looking at when they're looking to find an insurance company, a broker?
Yeah, thank you for the business, by the way, Holt. I appreciate the business. But one of the things that, Alliant, and I don't want to make this a commercial, so please forgive me, but Alliant and other brokers similar to us have specialties. And the key component for anybody on the call today is this. You need to find a broker that has a specialization. When you go to a doctor, if you've got a heart problem, you go to a cardiologist, you don't go to a foot doctor. You've got to have a specialist in insurance. It's the most important thing that I could stress to each and every one of you on the call. It's nice to give your friend who does your homeowner's insurance your business insurance, but your friend doesn't know what he's buying. And sometimes he buys something that isn't proper for you, and you don't know it until a claim happens, and then your business is at risk. By hiring a professional and someone that has the experience with construction, you give that risk to somebody that understands your business. We, Alliant, for example, our business platform at Alliant is for every type of business, but we have specialties. Where I run the construction specialty for New York. So this specialty is only focused on construction. If we get a restaurant, we give it to one of our friends on the general insurance side of the business. So each and every one of you should focus on the specialization of construction. And how do you do that? Number one, you can ask the broker. That's number one. Number two, you can Google the broker and see what their website says and what their specializations are, and understand that you might not be in the right space when you're talking to that broker, and you may have to move to a different space within the brokerage. And number three is really asking for referrals. You've got friends in the business, you're doing business with Holt, you're doing business with other general contractors. You could ask them for a recommendation or a referral for the broker or agent that would have the expertise and experience with construction. From my perspective, a lot of the policies that we're seeing that are deficient when we're doing the reviews come back to a broker that may not understand construction in New York. And I've had probably a dozen conversations with brokers on certain carriers where they say, oh, that's too expensive. I didn't want to explain this to the client that it was more expensive to have the proper coverage. So I just sold them a cheaper policy or a less expensive policy. And guess what? When the claim arises, the client is going to have the problem, not the broker, because the client signs off on the paperwork that the broker is giving them. So the broker is protected. You need to make sure that you're with someone that's not willing to sell you something just because it's a little less money, but gives you the right coverages.
Great. Thank you, Robert. And now, before we go to the live Q&A, I'm going to go through the current opportunities at the Terminal 8 project. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before I bring back our panelists, let me go through a current update of the Terminal 8 opportunities. TAA 2. Head house, 30-foot expansion, exterior enclosure, and interiors work. This project is bidding currently, so please make sure that you have your pre-qualification complete and approved in our system. Within this opportunity are the following contracts. HVAC, valued at $500,000 to $750,000. Electrical, for the first floor scope, valued at $1 to $1.5 million. Painting, valued at $100,000 to $150,000. Finishes, valued at $1.25 to $1.5 million. In the finishes package, it will be broken up into the following trades: millwork, terrazzo, flooring, feature walls, ornamental metal and glass, signage, and toilet partitions. And now let me reintroduce you to Robert DiBiase, Executive Vice President at Alliance Insurance. Good afternoon, Robert, and thank you for coming back to join us today.
Hello, and thank you everybody for taking the time to listen to our Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that are out.
Great. So the first question is, where can you obtain non-trade consultant general liability coverage?
Non-trade consultant. So, you know, when you look at that, we talked about the artists and contractors a little earlier, and you know, typically a non-trade consultant would be a professional engineer, architect, or the like. Those policies are available. There are a number of carriers that are doing them on what I spoke about earlier, that business owner's policy. That's kind of a multi-coverage policy. So I would say that the direct markets writing that are Hartford and Travelers, CNA as well. Those are the three carriers that I believe would write those types of policies. We certainly offer that coverage within Alliant, as do other brokers with a specialization in construction. Although it's not a trade policy, it is still construction related, being you know, an architect or an engineer policy. I hope that helps.
Yes, I think that answered it thoroughly. The next question is, insurance is getting so expensive now for small companies. Is there anything that can be done to mitigate these costs?
Wow, that's a great question. See, the biggest hurdle we have here in New York is minimum premiums. The losses in New York on general liability claims as they happen because of the labor law that I spoke about in the Q&A is really something that is causing a lot of pain for the insurance companies. And what I mean by that is, if you buy $1 million policy, you're getting $1 million worth of coverage from an insurance company. If you do $500,000 a year in sales and you should only pay $10,000 in premium for that policy, you need 100 losses or 100 policies to cover that $1 million claim. So the values associated with the cost of coverage versus the limit of protection are a little skewed. In New York, with a company that are smaller, you're kind of stuck in, I don't want to call it no man's land, but it's those artisan policies we spoke about on the Q&A. But you can buy those artisan policies with a smaller minimum premium that will have some limitations in coverage. Those limitations in coverage may be the types of projects and the size of projects you can purchase or work on. However, they will provide you the right coverages for New York. So I spoke about Hartford, I spoke about Travelers, I spoke about CNA. Travelers has a what I would call a small business unit, or Hartford or CNA. Many of these mainstream carriers have a small business unit that will still offer the right terms and conditions, the right coverages available and necessary for contractors, but at a lesser premium. Brokers like myself and brokers that are online with Travelers have access to this and can certainly help in getting these policies quoted and written. But from that perspective, you're going to be stuck a little bit with paying a little more percentage wise than what a larger contractor would do because of the imbalance in the coverage and the cost. I hope that answered it.
The next question is, what is your advice to a new company who's just starting out? Where do they begin as far as insurance?
Well, it goes back to what I said in the Q&A. Number one, you've got to find a broker with a specialization. Start there. Number two, that broker should be able to give you access. It kind of goes with question number two, to those online portals where there are lesser priced coverages that are proper for New York for contractors. And number three, when you put your company information out to the marketplace, I would recommend being as detailed as possible at the type of work you're going to pursue. In addition to that, a resume of the key individuals. So if you're breaking out from another company, if you worked for a larger company, if, for example, you worked for a Holt and you wanted to become a contractor on your own, you have a resume, you have experience. All of that information will help you when you're procuring the coverages, or when I, as the broker, is speaking to the marketplace to get you the right coverages. So that's the first thing is, make sure that you prepare a really quality resume and detail of your experience when putting a submission or an application into the insurance marketplace.
The next question is, what type of insurance coverage is required for project scheduling professional services? What would you recommend they have? Someone that does project schedules. So a project scheduler would walk the site, I would say bi-weekly. They'll look at the progress and then bring that information back and do their schedule. So what kind of insurance would you recommend for a company like that?
So New York, again, is a little difficult. So if you're touching the job site, you need to have general liability insurance. So every contractor or any non-construction related operation needs to have general liability coverage. So that's first and foremost. That covers the bodily injury and property damage emanating out of your operation. Although you're walking the site, you're not gonna push somebody down a set of stairs or something like that, but you could trip yourself, or your employee could trip on something. That employee tripping could trigger the labor law 240, 241. Even though it's not construction, even though you're walking the site, you still need to have that protection for your company. So that's number one. Number two, professional liability. Anytime you're doing some sort of planning, service, anything associated with the timeline or the scheduling, the critical paths associated with a construction project, you're becoming an expert or providing professional advice or guidance to the general contractor, the trade contractors, the mechanical, electric, plumbing trades, the roofer, whoever is on that site. By doing so, you're putting your stamp of approval on those timing, those schedules. So you need professional liability as well. And then third would be an umbrella policy for the exposures associated with both the general liability, the professional liability. Last but not least, the state of New York, you need workers' compensation insurance. So if you've got employees working for you, workers' compensation must be purchased. You can purchase it either through the New York State Insurance Fund or a carrier like Travelers, like Hartford, like CNA.
Great. And I think that's the last of our questions for today, Robert. So thank you so much for joining us. This was great and very informative. And I think you helped a lot of people navigate through the nuances of insurance and construction insurance. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, and enjoy the weekend, everybody.
And for next week, we're going to take a brief break for spring recess, and we'll be back on April 9th, Friday again at noon, for a great session on pre-qualification. We are going to have our professionals on board to answer any specific questions you might have on the status of an application or how to get started. And then don't forget, after that, we have our next 2 sessions towards the end of April, which are going to be one-on-one with our subcontractor base at the Terminal 8 project, as well as a one-on-one with the entire Terminal 8 team. So you'll be able to have a speed meeting with the professionals on site, as well as our subcontractors. So make sure you look for that. And we're going to have a break, and I will see you all back on the 9th, and have a great recess. Thank you for joining us today.